Hi, everybody. Matthew Turnage here. One of the things that's really fascinating about the Beatles is how they grew and changed and developed musically, and especially in such a relatively short period of time. Their music really progressed over the life of the band, and they didn't want to repeat themselves. They always pushed themselves to do something new and different. And an album that's usually pointed to as a key album where they shift from their earlier period into becoming something much more mature and stylistically varied is Rubber Soul. And while that is a great album and a key album in their development, I'd like to suggest that really the album where things begin to change for the Beatles, where they begin to evolve past the early Beatlemania period, is actually Rubber Soul's predecessor, Help. Um, I've mentioned before how I feel like this album is a little underrated. I think it's an incredibly strong album, and it really shows the Beatles coming into their own more and more as songwriters and their approach to the music. And I like to suggest that that happens in four ways. Uh, First is their uh, their growth in as lyricists, particularly John. Uh, Now, the album previous to Help, Beatles for Sale, does see John starting to get into a little bit more mature topics and talking about sort of his own uh, feelings and struggles a bit, just a little bit. I'm thinking about songs like "I'm a Loser" and "No Reply." Also, I think has a bit of a more mature approach. But the Help album, I think that really begins to develop for John. You think about the title track. Musically, it's not too far removed from the earlier period, but but lyrically, John has said that really was a cry for help. He really did need help at that time, and if you really look at the lyrics, he really is expressing, uh, that he's really going through some stuff there. And other songs on the album, like "You've Got to Hide Your Love Away" and "It's Only Love," I feel like those songs show a much more mature approach from John in the lyric writing. And I think that, of course, that would continue to go even further with Rubber Soul and beyond. So I think John's growth as a lyricist really begins to happen, uh, especially with the Help album. Secondly, the folk influence that really comes through in Rubber Soul, its roots are in the Help album. Uh, I've talked before about the U.S. version of Rubber Soul and how some people see it as a folk rock album. I don't particularly agree with that, but I've talked about that elsewhere. Um, However, part of what makes it feel that way, I think, is the fact that there are two songs from Help that are included at the beginning of each side of the U.S. Rubber Soul. And of course, those songs are "I've Just Seen a Face," which is very sort of folk influenced, and "It's Only Love." Um, so that sort of folk sound that got associated with the U.S. Rubber Soul, as far as the Beatles are concerned, that has its beginnings with Help. And I think that's a growth in terms of expanding the scope of their songwriting that comes in those songs, getting a little bit beyond just the normal sort of rock songs that had been, a large chunk of what they had done before. They always had some variety, but I feel like those songs were further opening the doors a little bit for them in terms of their songwriting approach. The third thing that I think Help has that represents a growth and a change in the Beatles is George continuing to grow and develop as a songwriter. Prior to Help, George had only had one songwriting credit. It was on With the Beatles and Don't Bother Me, but he gets two tracks on Help. And significantly, one of those tracks is included in the movie. The fact that they only had seven songs for the movie, and one of them is one of George's, I think says a lot about how he was already starting to establish himself as a songwriter. I think he wouldn't reach his full maturity for a few more albums, but he makes a very significant contribution to the album, I believe, with "I Need You." It is a tremendous song, and and really shows that George has been paying attention to his bandmates and really applied himself in his songwriting. And of course, he would only get better and better from this point on. But the fact that he's got 2 songs on this album and would be a regular contributor to all their albums going forward. And again, as I said, one of those songs actually gets a spot in the film. Really shows that George is becoming a force to be reckoned with as a songwriter also. And then the last thing that the Help album has that I think is really a significant moment in the Beatles' growth as artists and as songwriters is expanding their instrumentation beyond what we traditionally think of as rock instrumentation. Prior to this, the Beatles had pretty much stuck to what they could replicate on stage. So their songs were, based around guitar, bass, and drums. Occasionally they might have something like a harmonica or some sort of keyboards, whether it was piano or electric piano or whatnot. But of course, with Help, we get the big shift when Yesterday is included on this album with its prominent string part. And strings would become a regular part of the Beatles' arsenal from this point forward, and not just strings, but as we get to Rubber Soul, Indian instruments begin to get introduced with the sitar on Norwegian Wood, and of course that would expand further with Revolver and Sergeant Pepper's, and looking beyond just what was possible just for normal rock band instrumentation, looking into other sounds and it became more about creating a sonic experience as opposed to creating an experience for a live presentation. And so I feel like Help is a key album for the Beatles' growth in that department because of Yesterday. And of course, that's also, I mentioned John's growth as a lyricist. I think Yesterday is one of Paul's best lyrics from the earlier part of their career. So he's really beginning to mature as well. I think the reason why people kind of dismiss Help, or maybe not dismiss it, but lump it in with just the early Beatlemania period, is the film, which of course the film does go for that Beatlemania vibe and how the band is presented. I think particularly of the scene, where they walk to their homes and they each, it's the row of houses, they each go in their own separate door and they come in and they're all living together. And this idea of the Beatles is like, this kind of fun-loving gang of brothers who all kind of live together in this crazy house and all that. I think that sort of permeates Help. It's in the movie, and I think in people's minds that may carry over a bit to the album. But I think if you really listen to the album as an album divorced from the film, I think you'll find that you'll see a band that is really starting to grow. Now, they haven't completely left the early Beatles period. There's still plenty of songs that are that straight ahead rock and roll, and of course it still has a couple of cover songs, which was a hallmark of their early period. But I think in terms of their own songwriting, I think they took a step forward with each album, but I feel like Help is a much bigger step forward than is often given credit for. So to me, the evolution of the Beatles, the key moment for them is not Rubber Soul, but Help. So that's my opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Do you feel like the big evolution for the Beatles happens at a later point, Rubber Soul or Revolver even? Do you figure that the Beatles never really went through a big evolution? It was a constant evolution from start to finish. I mean, I think I could certainly go along with that if someone wanted to argue that position. But just let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.